Welcome to the Suds, Snacks, and Socialism Virtual Forum. Today's topic is Biden's foreign policy, what's new? Our speakers today are Dr. Lawrence Shoup and Jonathan Knack. This forum is a cooperative effort of the Alameda County Peace and Freedom Party, Bay Area System Change, Not Climate Change, and the Oakland Greens. We invite you to sign up on our new announcement list to be notified of future forums. I'm Marcia Fineland, and I'm your moderator today. We'll be starting with presentations by the speakers. Following that, you will have a chance to ask questions and make statements. Please find the chat and participant icons at the bottom of your screen. You can signify that you want to be on the stack by typing stack in the chat or by using the hand-raising feature under participants. We welcome your various political opinions. We do not allow attacks on individuals. Our first speaker is Dr. Lawrence Shoup, joining us from Oakland, California. Larry received his PhD in the history of American foreign policy in 1974. He's written 5 books, numerous articles, and taught US history at 6 different universities. Now retired, he's been an active member of 3 different unions and represented the National Writers Union on the Alameda County Central Labor Council. His latest book is Wall Street's Think Tank, the Council on Foreign Relations and the Empire of Neoliberal Geopolitics. His article on the Biden administration and the Council on Foreign Relations appeared in the May 2021 issue of Monthly Review magazine. Take it away, Dr. Shoup.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you for everyone for attending. The answer to the question, the brief answer to the question, U.S. foreign policy, what's new, is not much. There's a lot that's old. And I'm going to start by talking about our world today, which I'm quoting Samara Min. It's the empire of chaos. The world today is the empire of chaos. The first aspect of this empire of chaos that we live in today is economic. Stagnation, financialization, globalization, and speculation, that is casino capitalism, are key tendencies in the capitalist core that runs the world. The economy is dominated by billionaires and multimillionaire capitalists in many capitalist developed nations. And there's some amazing statistics in this regard. For example, one of them, 26 billionaire capitalists now control about half of the world's social wealth, which is an obscenity. Accumulation of capital continues to be the central goal of capitalism, despite the obvious need for a vast program to save the planet, for good health to care for all, for full employment at living wages, equality and social justice, retirement pensions, adequate housing, and so on, to say nothing about the need to end wage slavery and having a fulfilling democratic system involving the rule by the workers, that is eco-socialism. Secondly, we have in this world of chaos, and the empire of chaos, is a looming environmental catastrophe. The capitalists have finally recognized that global warming impacts to the planet's ecosystems, the air, species, water, forests, oceans, and landforms will affect them too. And a great debate over ecological strategy is now convulsing many capitalist institutions globally. The global economic system is tied together by fossil fuels, but the capitalists refuse to consider the truth that is these fossil fuels and the contradictions of capitalism that generates environmental catastrophe. A third aspect of this world of chaos is pandemics. It's a crisis due to inadequate public healthcare systems, human impacts on wild spaces, and human experiments with viruses resulting in pandemics, which COVID-19 is only the latest example. The result has been the massive social murder of vulnerable people, the poorest and most discriminated against elements of the world's working class. Social murder, the term social murder, refers to the deaths of people who would live if healthcare and other resources were more fairly distributed, as would be the case in a fully eco-socialist society, but are not in capitalist society. The fourth aspect is global irregular hybrid warfare. This refers to the varied forms of conflicts characteristic of our time, short of all-out warfare. As such, it includes attempts to influence or overthrow governments, assassinate key leaders, guerrilla warfare, cyber warfare, etc. The US is the largest imperialist power in world history and is using hybrid warfare to maintain its control. A fifth aspect is global fascist movements worldwide. Due to many factors, including the breakdown of liberal democracy, decline of the left, capitalist inequality, that is the power of these billionaires, mass migration, often linked to environmental catastrophe, the sea of despair among many people resulting in suicides, drug, alcohol addiction, lowered life expectancy, racism, gender discrimination, and ethnocentrism. Another aspect, a sixth aspect, is the world communication of the capitalist world. The world communication system of the capitalist world is increasingly monopolized and untruthful, leaving out class analysis almost totally and allowing conspiracies to run rampant. Another aspect is there is a resurgence of the left among youth, but usually they're disorganized and without adequate leadership. Finally, the union movement continues its long-term decline due to overwhelming capitalist power and inadequate, often sellout and undemocratic union leadership. Thus, an empire of chaos created by the United States over the past decades. So it is all important to understand who makes American foreign policy. Since 1921, one capitalist class dominated organization with leadership and funding from key capitalist class families I call it Wall Street's think tank, the Council on Foreign Relations, with supporting roles for other think tanks and policy groups like Brookings Institution, the Carnegie Institution, Center for Strategic and International Studies, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, and so on, all of which are interlocked with the Council on Foreign Relations. It's not like they're separate, totally separate organizations. Their members are members of the Council on Foreign Relations and vice versa. They've dominated the formulation and execution of US imperialist foreign policy. The Council on Foreign Relations selects key policymakers from the ranks of its members and staff, trains them, organizes discussions and debates about strategic grand strategy and its implementation, and is able to insert these people into government to define and implement the international sector of the US capitalist classes' national interest. They call it the quote unquote national interest. Well, it's the ruling class capitalist interest, not the national interest. These people are both professional experts in varied fields from key universities and from ruling class families. The mainstream media solidifies their ideology of neoliberal geopolitics. That's the ideology that it's identified in my books. The market and military-based domination and exploitation of the land and labor of much of the world to facilitate capital accumulation for the richest Americans. Based in New York and Washington, D.C., the CFR is the more diversified and internationally oriented sector of the US capitalist class. In other words, they're also concerned, besides with profit, they're also concerned with the legitimacy of the system. And so they're more open than the Republicans, currently at least, to concessions to the working class. They have a certain noblesse oblige and very intelligent type policies. Biden and the CFR is my next section. And I have this article in Monthly Review in the last issue. You can get it if you want, just by typing in Monthly Review on an internet search, and you can find my article on Biden and the Council on Foreign Relations. And first, I want to start with the Democratic Party tradition since Woodrow Wilson, because I think Biden is following the Democratic Party tradition. Through Franklin Roosevelt, Truman, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Carter, Clinton, Obama, down to Biden, has been to use the federal government for reforms at home. And then, usually later, but sometimes simultaneously, imperialism abroad. Beginning with Franklin Roosevelt, all of these administrations have relied heavily on the Council on Foreign Relations personnel to implement their economic and foreign policies especially. So an active reformist federal government at home and aggressive foreign policies abroad will be characteristic of the Biden administration. For my monthly review article, I studied Biden's top 30 policymakers, finding that 17 of these 30 are members or otherwise closely connected just to the Council on Foreign Relations. Several others are connected to Carnegie, top multinational law firms, leading corporations, and capitalist class policy advisory bodies like WestX Executive, at Macro Advisors, and the Cohen Group. Overall, 25 of the 30 top advisors in the Biden administration, Biden's advisors, 25 of the 30, that is 83%, are connected to, and I would say represent, USA's dominant ruling plutocracy. This dominant sector of the capitalist class is international, and its economic interests and orientation is international. Another aspect of the CFR and characteristic of the Biden team is education at the top leading private plutocratic universities. These universities have the largest endowments and are key training grounds for capitalist class oriented professionals. Of the 30 Biden team members, fully 12 of them, 12 out of the 30, received at least one degree from Harvard, 6 from Yale, 7 from Oxford and England, 2 from Stanford, 5 others are connected to Columbia, University of Chicago, and Princeton. These are all private universities with big endowments and train capitalist class professionals. The stress on identity politics, the diversity of the Biden team, that Biden is stressing the most diverse cabinet in history, et cetera, in terms of race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and so on, disguises the very limited diversity of class positions and class alliances. This is a group representative of the American plutocracy. And that was the purpose of my article in Monthly Review, was to call that out. These aren't a diverse group. They're representing a certain part of the American ruling class. Trump and the Republicans. We should look at the Trump and Republican tradition as well. Republican tradition in foreign policy is based on a more nationally oriented economic enterprises. That is, Main Street more than Wall Street. This overlaps with the ethnocentric tendencies of the Midwest and southern sectors of the US and the slave owner George Washington's warnings about foreign entanglements. But many Republicans are also Wall Street types and have foreign economic interests. So there's a war within the Republican Party historically over foreign policy and fight wars with the Democrats. For example, you can look at a few historical incidents. In the aftermath of the First World War, the Republicans in the Senate prevented the US from joining the League of Nations, which was Democrat Woodrow Wilson's dream. In the 1930s, the isolationists in the Republican Party tried to block Franklin Roosevelt and the CFR's international actions. After World War II, there was a period of Democratic-Republican cooperation during the Cold War against the Soviet Union. The two Bush administrations represented the peak of this cooperative Democratic-Republican era. With the rise of Trump, and the older isolationist tradition has been renewed. But the rise of China has given both sides reasons to cooperate again to block China's rise. Trump's administration represented the nadir of CFR influence in the federal government. Some CFR people and what they represent were part of the Trump administration. For example, the Trade Representative Lemonster, the Treasury Secretary Chow, the National Security Advisors McMaster and Bolton, Venezuelan Czar Elliot Abrams, etc., were all Council on Foreign Relations people. Elliot Abrams was even CFR staff before he went into the Trump administration. But CFR influence was much less in the Trump administration than had been the case with either before the Biden administration or in the case of the Biden administration. For example, the Council on Foreign Relations highly values the NATO and other US alliances. Trump, not so much. The Council on Foreign Relations wanted the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Trump canceled it, etc. Looming over the Democratic versus Republican issue is the larger question of democracy. What is real democracy? Just electoral politics dominated by the two major parties, or democracy including equality in the workplace and daily life? Is it increasingly clear that the Republican Party now wants to eliminate what limited forms of democracy currently exist in the United States, creating a white republic, against multicultural diversity America. The Democrats want to preserve some forms of democracy, but do not see that a more radical form of democracy is necessary to stop the fascist threat. That is why, in my opinion, we need left-wing third parties advocating for real democracy. Political space, the question of political space narrowing is an open question because of the fascist threat. I think it's worth discussing. And also, is there a center in American politics anymore, or has it been destroyed and there are only extremes? I could also mention in this regard what I call hegemonic ideological governing regimes. These are combinations of ideas, policies, institutions, and electoral dynamics adding up to a governing regime. Before the New Deal, market-based competitive capitalism was usually dominant. The New Deal created a new hegemonic ideological governing order, which lasted from the 1930s to the 1980s. Even the Republican Eisenhower accepted as a given high taxes on the rich and corporations, moderate unionization, unions were allowed to organize more easily, Social Security, large role of the federal government, for example, in building the federal highway system, imperialism abroad, etc. The New Deal order was dominant and the Republicans accepted it. This underwent a gradual transition as the Republican Party's right wing grew in power and a market-based neoliberal governing regime took over, accelerated with Reagan's presidency during the 1980s. This neoliberal market regime is now weakening, opening the way for challenges from sectors of the left, for example, Bernie Sanders, and the right, for example, Trump. Biden, you could say, is kind of a Democratic Party Reagan, a genial old guy trying to shore up the neoliberal order and make it a bit more progressive due to pressures within the Democratic Party from the left. Now, the next part of my talk is key policy outcomes, climate and China. These are both existential threats and that need to be treated seriously. Climate, the real Green New Deal and Biden's light one.
Larry, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to give you 5 more minutes.
Okay.
So instead of ending at 302, it'll be 307, okay?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I don't know how long that lasted, but it was serious
We're
interruption.
also bombing the chat.
Okay. About 15 years ago, the Green Party formulated the concept of a Green New Deal. Part of the Green Party campaign platforms since 2010 have included this Green New Deal. Mainstream media refused to cover the Green New Deal until Democrats began to appropriate a weakened version of the concept in 2018, generally refusing to go beyond neoliberal market approaches. A robust Green New Deal is required because of the seriousness of the climate crisis, which is threatening the habitability of our planet. This makes it necessary to go beyond market-based approaches, using government power to implement the serious changes now needed. Here, the largely unknown history of government takeovers and management of US private enterprises during periods of crisis is worth knowing and recounting. It's not well known at all. In World War I, World War II, Korean War, and in the savings and loan scandal, the federal government took over and operated key enterprises in the national interest, including railroads, steel mills, coal mines, trucking firms, etc. This could be done again. The Howie Hawkins Green Party campaign of 2020 raised the eco-socialist alternative and proposed a $42 trillion program over 10 years to produce 100% clean energy system by 2030, involving a reconstruction of all economic sectors under social ownership and control of key sectors of the US economy. This would allow democratic planning and federal works projects in every sector to ensure full employment and dealing with the climate crisis. Allied with this was a social justice program of guarantees from the federal government, full employment at living wages, free health care, income above the poverty level, decent housing, good public education, secure retirement. So, of course, that program didn't get very far. It was never covered in the mainstream media, and the Green Party's quite weak and unable to put it forward adequately. The Sanders program, Bernie Sanders program, was less ambitious. Compared to 42 trillion over 10 years, he proposed 16.3 trillion. Still a substantial program. Biden's program is 2 trillion. So we see how inadequate and continued neoliberalism when neoliberalism has clearly failed. So we need a serious Green New Deal, and that's something to agitate about. On China, for the Council on Foreign Relations and the Biden administration that its members dominate, China policy is now the end-all and be-all of American foreign policy. Earlier in this century, the Council and wider US ruling class believed that a rising China could be a responsible member and partner in the US-dominated global order. This view changed as China's power grew and China gradually indicated that it would pursue an independent course, step by step, eventually becoming the dominant world power, the most powerful nation in world history. That seems to be China's ambition. Currently, China is still well behind the US in world power. And even regionally in Asia, it's behind the United States. It is rapidly becoming the world's #1 economy. A comparison of elements of national power between the United States and China reveals that the US is well ahead. In conventional military power, the dollar is still used as the world's main currency. The US alliance system gives it big advantages as it does control of oil, including oil transportation. US controls that with its sea power, and China needs that oil, and the United States has a hammer over China because it can cut off that with its sea power, cut off the oil that China gets, and Japan for that matter, gets from the Middle East and other places. US tech companies are the biggest in the world. The US ruling capitalist class is well organized and thirsts for continued domination of the world, which the CFR calls primacy. There are serious splits in the country, however, focusing on multiculturalism, whether we're going to be a diverse country, a hybrid nation versus white nationalist, white supremacist nation. Unclear how and when this will be resolved. China's centralized Communist Party control does offer some advantages, and its geopolitical position and Belt and Road policy across Eurasia threatens US domination in Asia all the way to Europe. It is building its military and economic strength fast, has a developing alliance with Russia, and while also divided and found it necessary to suppress the Uyghurs in the western part of the country, China is offering a serious threat to US world domination, prompting the CFR to engage in grand strategic planning and implementation to head off this threat. And the CFR has had two important reports, which you can get on the CFR.org website if you're interested. The 2015 Grand Strategy Towards China Study Group and one that came later. In March 2015, the Council on Foreign Relations published the results of a study group they organized to work out what should be the US grand strategy, quote unquote, towards China. The 43 members of this group included 32 members of the Council on Foreign Relations, with representation from Brookings, Center for Strategic and International Studies, Rand Corporation, the Wilson School, Hudson, and others. Former top US government officials, undersecretaries of state and defense like Paul Wolfowitz and others, former CIA chiefs, ambassadors to major countries were part of this study group that was scoping out how the US should respond to China. This study group decided that China was now an existential threat, this is the term they used, existential threat, quote unquote, to US hegemony worldwide. And China was a unique threat and was pursuing a policy of accumulating, quote, comprehensive national power to gradually become the world's preeminent global power. Thus, the US policy of accommodating China's rise and trying to integrate it into the US created and controlled neoliberal world system had failed, the Council concluded, and now a more confrontational policy was needed, creating, in the Council on Foreign Relations' own words, quote, dangerous circumstances. These dangerous circumstances are evidently because the Council believes it is worth risking a catastrophic world war to preserve US global hegemony. In 2020, Robert Blackwell, the Henry Kissinger Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, a paid staff member, was one of the same individuals that headed up the 2015 Grand Strategy Towards China Study Group, penned a 73-page long CFR report entitled Implementing the Grand Strategy Towards China. The specific policies advocated by the CFR and being adopted now by the Biden administration are: one, the central objective, quote unquote, is preserving US dominant role in shaping the entire global system, balancing China's growing role while cooperating with China to address common challenges like climate change. The outcome of this struggle will, quote, in the Council's words, quote, determine the shape of the international order for decades to come. Secondly, the Council believes that foreign policy begins at home. That's a term they like to use. And so the US government needs to address, quote, address serious political, economic, and societal divisions in the United States. So reforms are needed. Infrastructure must be mobilized, the immigration system reformed, people educated about the China challenge, the China threat, improving education, protecting democracy, increasing the military budget, and building up US technological development, which is an effort on the scale of the giant Second World War Manhattan Project. So you can see some of the similarities already in the Biden administration program. Thirdly, the US alliance system, neglected by Trump, potentially offers an enormous advantage to the United States. And so patient diplomacy to rebuild this alliance system is now needed. Improved policy coordination follows from this. That is, policy coordination with potential and actual US allies. Fourthly, US military power projection in Asia must be made much more robust and aggressive. That's the term they like to use, aggressive, quote unquote. Resources, military resources should be shifted from the Middle East and the European theaters to increase US military capability around China's sea and land borders and, quote, bring power to bear, end quote, despite any Chinese opposition, even around Chinese borders, that even the South China Sea and close to China's borders. Freedom of the seas, quote unquote, is demanded by the Council, especially right in the South China Sea. Conflict with China over Taiwan should be avoided, in the Council's view, by adroit diplomacy. China follows, in the Council's view, a realistic balance of power policies, and so it must engage with the US that is both aggressive and militarily powerful. Another interesting aspect of this CFR report was Russia. Concessions to Russia in consultation with allies should be offered in an attempt to eventually have, quote, a better relationship with both Russia and China than they have with each other. Now, you could say that might entail some good luck on the US part, but that's what they're looking for, a better relationship with Russia and China than they have with each other. Finally, almost as an afterthought, the report recommends an urgent and comprehensive bilateral dialogue with China regarding climate change. Green energy and clean technologies are recommended. One of the Council on Foreign Relations members on Biden's 30-member top team, planning team, is Kurt Campbell, Biden's Asia czar. He and the
5 minutes, Larry. 5 minutes.
I'm just about done, Jim. He and the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, authorized a Foreign Affairs articles, and Foreign Affairs is the Council on Foreign Relations magazine, in-house magazine. They authored an article in 2019 on US-China policy, which basically agrees with the CFR approach to China policy. Conclusion, I'll just have a brief conclusion and then have a little bit more in the wrap up. A plan to successfully deal with the twin threats of ecological destruction and great power war is needed on the part of the left. And another thing we need to do is have a new definition and widely disseminated definition of the national interest as the people of the world's interest, not the capitalist class interest or the billionaire's interest. So I'll close there and have a few more comments at the end. And we can go on to another presentation, I think, by Jonathan Mack. Take it away, brother. No, I guess Marcia's going to introduce Jonathan. Marcia?
Hi. So thank you very much, Larry. And I'm really sorry about those interruptions. They're not that there's several of us working on removing people who do that, but it just takes a little time. Next, we have, joining us from his home in Cuenca, Ecuador, Jonathan Knack. Jonathan is a retired worker. He's a veteran socialist activist and sometimes journalist who has been involved in Latin America's solidarity work since 1979. He's reported from Ecuador, Venezuela, and Cuba. Welcome, Jonathan.
Well, thank you very much, Marcia, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. Comrades, I have on my socialist thinking cap for you all. I just want to mention that I've been living in Ecuador for over 2.5 years now, but I lived in the Bay Area for 34 years, 31 years in Oakland. Many of you know me. I am indeed joining you from Ecuador. I'll give you a little peek of the beautiful Andes Mountains. Ecuador is the Cuenca is the third largest city in Ecuador. It is high up in the Andes Mountains, over 8,000 feet. That's, to give you some context, that's considerably higher than Denver. And it has a metropolitan population of about 700,000. I also wanted to start today with something that's not on my topic, which is to congratulate my Bay Area comrades for the successful picket of an Israeli ship at the port of Oakland. This is solidarity. This is real. This is substance. And I love you all for that. I'm going to pick up on Brother Shoup's longtime friend and comrade of mine comments about how there's not much new in foreign policy with the change of presidents. And I'm focusing here on Latin America and the Caribbean. And little has changed. However, sometimes very small changes can have big repercussions. And there has been a small change that is making a difference right now in Latin America and the Caribbean. Former President Trump put pressure on the presidents in Latin America and the Caribbean not to seek vaccines from either Russia or China, only from the United States primarily and Europe, from those companies based in those areas. And this was a big problem because those companies were not shipping vaccines to Latin America. In Ecuador today, less than 5% of the population has been vaccinated. It's really probably about 3%. Ecuador is nowhere near where California and most of the United States is today. And Biden made a small change. He said to the presidents of Latin American and Caribbean countries, go ahead, do the right thing for your people. Get the vaccines where you can. And this is making some difference right now. The situation in Latin America and the Caribbean regarding the pandemic is extreme. It is much worse than the United States. There's no comparison, really. In terms of infections and deaths, there's no comparison. Over 1 million people have died in South America alone from COVID. And these statistics are wrong. They are lies. They are big undercounts of the actual deaths from COVID. The economies of Latin America and the Caribbean have been much more affected by the pandemic. And unlike in the United States, other developed countries, there have been no benefits for the people. No unemployment insurance, no stimulus checks, and also many fewer workers are capable of working their jobs from home. So this is very important context to keep in mind. Latin America and the Caribbean have been absolutely devastated by this pandemic. Okay, that's a piece of background. Political discourse in the United States, in a broad sense, on Latin America and the Caribbean is minimal. It's pathetic. And people don't know what's happening. And that's very sad. Even some on the left who take an interest, it's hard to get a lot of detailed information. And it was not an issue at all in the presidential election in the United States, as far as I could see. Maybe China was a tiny bit of but otherwise foreign policy, nothing. And of course, this is because the two parties have very little difference when it comes to foreign policy. However, keep in mind that Latin America and the Caribbean forms the foundation for US imperialism. It is where US imperialism expanded first, where it is strongest, and it is absolutely a linchpin for US imperialism. And President Biden may not have talked, people may not have been paying much attention to Latin America and the Caribbean during the campaign and afterwards, but events in this region may overtake President Biden. And because the region is in great turmoil, the people are suffering horribly. They don't have adequate food to eat. They don't have money to buy even the most basic things, many of the most basic things that they need. People have been on a diet of bread and rice and some other items that they maybe can get for more than a year now. It's terrible. It's just that the nutrition going on in these countries has been very much affected. I'm going to review quickly the situation in Latin America and the Caribbean, especially. And the first country I'm going to start with is the one that is making the biggest news right now, which is Colombia. In Colombia, people may be aware there have been more than a month of strikes and road blockades. This is known in Latin America as una paro, a paralysis of the country. The government of Colombia has been shooting down protesters in the streets. We know for sure more than 60 protesters have been killed by police and army shooting live ammunition into protest crowds. We know for sure that hundreds of people have been disappeared. Their families do not know what has happened to them. This is what's happening today in Colombia. And this is incredibly important, not only for Colombia, but for all of Latin America. And I want to make an analogy for you all. This is not perfect analogy, but I think it may help you understand why what is happening today in Colombia is so important for the entire region. Colombia is well known as the most right-wing government in all of Latin America, the most violent and the most vicious government in all of Latin America. Every year, the International Labor Organization posts a list of reported people who are labor organizers who were murdered. Each year on that list, half of the people in the whole world were murdered in Colombia. The right, it is the center of the right wing in all of Latin America. And to make this analogy, I want you to imagine if some really right wing and important state in the United States was having huge protests for over a month, including blockading roads and paralyzing the whole state. And this state was Texas or Alabama. How would the other states, how would Californians react to this? I think the reaction would be, wow, this is happening in Texas and Alabama? That's very inspiring. If they can do that there, we can do even more here. And this is right now what is happening. Now, I don't know how this current protests in Colombia are going to end. We know that the government is going to use extreme violence and repression. In the past, this has been enough. It has worked in Colombia. It is not clear that it is working now. And if it doesn't work, this may precipitate many changes throughout Latin America. So I just want to highlight that for you. Keep checking out what's happening in Colombia now. And Colombia is the beginning of the Andean region in South America, the northern part. And if you go down the states, going down the Pacific coast of South America, there is Colombia, there is Ecuador, which just had an election, and this is really what I know a lot about. I'm not an expert, certainly not a scholar on the level of Larry Shute, Brother Shute, but I can talk to you more about Ecuador. I'm going to skip over that for the moment. Below Ecuador is Peru. Tomorrow is a runoff presidential election in Peru. A left-wing candidate may win. There has never been a left-wing president in Peru. So this could be a big change for that country. Then you continue south and you get to Chile. It was about a month ago, Chile voted on a constituent assembly to write a new constitution to replace the constitution written under the rule of General Pinochet, the dictator. This is incredibly important for Chile. And in the vote, left and progressive candidates for this constituent assembly did very well. And right-wing candidates did not do as well as they had hoped. The right-wing parties had hoped to get 1/3 of the representatives to the constituent assembly because it takes 2/3 to pass any new provision. They got only 25%. They cannot block progressive initiatives to the Constitution in Chile now. Then we move over to the largest country in South America, Brazil. People are probably aware all charges, convictions against former President Lula have been dropped. He is going to run for president next year. And he has a very good chance to win. He's still the most popular politician in Brazil. And so this is the general situation in regard to South America. And I want to now mention 3 countries which the US government is imposing economic sanctions in the region: Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. And this is very severe on these countries. They are suffering tremendously. Venezuela is in a very bad situation now. Things are not working well. There's almost no money. People are not eating well. The hospital system is almost collapsed. It's bad. The regime is holding on, but the situation is extremely bad. I'm also sad to say that the situation is also bad in Cuba now. There is not a threat to the regime the way there is in Venezuela, but the people are suffering economically now in a big way. It's actually quite similar to what they call the special period in Cuba, which followed the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then I want to mention another Caribbean country, Haiti. In Haiti, the president there has canceled elections, refuses to hold them. There have been protests, big protests over the last year, and he refuses to go. And the only reason why he is able to stay is because he's being backed by the United States. Let me mention about Ecuador. This is what I really know the most about. And it's not the most important country in the region, it's a small country. But issues that were prevalent in the election here will also be prevalent in other countries in Latin America. And the left had a candidate, Andreas Arauz. He almost won. He got 47.5% of the vote in the runoff. He got 32% in the first round, and the next highest candidate came in second place, got less than 20%. However, there were a total of 16 parties running candidates in the first round, and 15 of the parties ended up backing the right-wing candidate, who was one of the richest men in Ecuador and a banker, Guillermo Lasso. So he is the new president. He is a total neoliberal. He is going to look to privatize government services and continue to borrow money from the IMF, World Bank, and other capitalist financial institutions. A key role in this election was played by a party and a candidate that ran on an indigenous party, which goes by the name Pachacutec here in Ecuador. And this candidate, he said he is an eco-socialist. He is indigenous. He has opposed mining and petroleum exploration on indigenous lands and in lands that are sensitive to development. And he is a water protector, and he has genuine credentials as a water protector. He is actually from my region. He was essentially the governor of this province where Cuenca is. But the thing is, he is a total enemy of the left party here, and which was called in this election, the Union for Hope. And he says that he prefers the capitalists over the left party here, even though he claims he is an eco-socialist. My question would be, what kind of eco-socialist does that? This is something that we are going to see because the ruling class's strategy is always the same: divide and conquer. Any divisions that they can play up, they will. And they are going to be looking to divide groups from indigenous communities and movements against what is more of an urban left in Latin America. And this was done extremely effectively in Ecuador, and it is the reason, this eco-socialist is the reason why the banker won the runoff. Let's be very clear about that in Ecuador. I want to make a comment about revolutionary socialism in this region. This is not a time where the revolutionary socialist movements are strong. They may use the word, but they are not looking to overthrow the government and impose a radically different economic system. So this is a time when things are dominated in this region by reform socialists. And even Cuba, they're not trying to get people to do anything else. In fact, Fidel said before he died, he said, you can't go the way of Cuba. You can't do it. It's a reason why he was, and Cuba was instrumental in negotiating a peace deal between the guerrillas in Colombia and the government of Colombia. And there's very little support for some kind of revolutionary socialism right now. You just don't find a lot of it. That's a fact throughout the region. And maybe things can change in the future, but at this point, that's where things are at. I want to mention something about solidarity work, which I'm engaged in now. And the overall situation of international solidarity work regarding Latin America and the Caribbean and the United States is not good. It's considerably weaker than it's been. There are a number of groups that are doing work in this area, but it's not really cohesive. There's no one network, and we need to rebuild this, sisters and brothers. We need to rebuild our international solidarity. Some of the groups that are involved in it now are the Task Force on the Americas, which is based in the Bay Area, the Alliance for Global Justice, Code Pink, and Chicago Alba Solidarity. Now, what is international solidarity all about? We saw a great example with this picket of the Israeli ship in Oakland yesterday. And that is, I believe, the most effective form of international solidarity. But it includes protesting the imperial policies of the United States. It includes educating the public as much as possible about what is going on in the region and the imperialist role that the United States plays in this region. It can include material assistance directly to people who need help in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm telling you, sisters and brothers, people need help now. And it is also connecting and working with migrants from this region who are now living in the United States. I've just been started to do solidarity work in about the last 6 months with the Democratic Socialists of America. And people may be aware that this organization has gone through a radical transformation since 2016. And part of that transformation is their whole approach to international work has changed. Their international committee is only about 2 years old now. It's a new formation within the organization. The Americas subcommittee, which is what I'm actually on, is less than a year old. It's a very different thing, and I'd be happy to talk with folks more about the solidarity work that DSA is doing. It seems like it's going to be a pretty good home for me to do international solidarity work. And the organization has changed in many other ways. We can get into that if folks want to, and how that might impact international solidarity work that DSA does. But overall, it looks like when I reach out to other groups, I'm getting a pretty good response when I say I'm from DSA. So I want to just mention that I don't say DSA is the answer for everybody, but
5 minutes, Jonathan.
That's
5 minutes.
growing in power. And so that's really the end of my comments. And I'd be happy to, ask questions, whatever questions I can answer that people have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. So now it is time for participants. You can find the chat and the participant icons at the bottom of your screen. And you can signify that you want to be on the stack by typing stack in the chat or by using the hand raising feature under participants. We welcome your various political opinions. We do not allow personal attacks on individuals. So the way we usually do this is call on people, maybe take 3 or so questions or comments and then go back to the speakers. Possibly, I think we'll have a 2-minute time limit depending on how many people we have wanting to speak. So far, I'm not getting messages about the stack, but I do see Bill Balderston's hand, so I'll call on Bill.
Thank you, Marcia, and I apologize that my video has been screwed up lately. So anyway, first let me thank both speakers who are both friends and comrades and people I've worked with many years and admire. First, for Larry, one thing you mentioned in terms of the different components of the advisors was those who might have stronger links with working class constituencies. And I wonder if you think their value in this mix is only to sell the program or whether they can play some, I won't say independent, but somewhat a different course. And the other thing, I resubscribed to Foreign Affairs as soon as Biden came in, and my general sense of it is that their view is that things are not going that well. So the March-April issue, the 2 main headlines are decline and fall, can America ever lead again? And at the top, how America and China can avoid war. And the more recent one is on trade wars. Perhaps it's just being deliberately negative in order to pose a more positive future. But I found that somewhat interesting. And I also found somewhat interesting the recent, this week, electronic article, Will Beijing Attack Taiwan? Which seems to go beyond their usual approach. And just your thoughts. Oh, and one more thing about China. It seems to me that's absolutely essential is for all the talk about the South China Sea and the resurgence of the Chinese conventional military. The question of, okay, cyber war is critical. In the last 30 seconds, I just want to tell Jonathan, we are raising the question of Colombia solidarity within the Labor Council and elsewhere. And I think it's incredibly inspiring. They defeated this really regressive tax, I think, which is a step forward. And hopefully we will make it a more visible issue as we go on. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Bill. So we're going to take a tea. I hope the presenters are taking notes. So the next 2 will be Greg Jan, followed by Dave Kavlicek. Go ahead, Greg. You might be muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was busy, and so I had the video off, and of course I was unmuted until just now. Sorry about that. So I have a question for each of the speakers, and of course, thank you very much. I really enjoyed both presentations. So for Larry, I'm wondering a bit in the longer term than what Bill had mentioned. That is, from what you know about the way that the we call them the ruling class, the powers that be, operate, do you think that when it comes time for the next presidential election, 2 to 3 years from now, do you think it's likely that they'll keep continuing to support the Democrats, or do you think that they might, pay attention to what's going on with the Republicans, and especially if Trump is going to be the candidate again? Do you think that they would consider someone like Trump again? I'm just curious on how you see things shaking out in that regards. And for Jonathan, I'm just wondering what it's like in Ecuador with you know, the on the left in Ecuador in regards to Stephen Donziger, you know, the attorney that's being set up for the Chevron Texaco, however many $5 billion or whatever they're supposed to owe. So I'm
30
just curious
seconds.
about
30 seconds.
Ecuador thinks about Donziger in that situation.
Okay, and we'll go to Dave, and then we'll give the speakers some time to respond to these various questions. Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, I have 5 questions, 4 of which are mainly to Jonathan, one to Larry, but some of the ones for Jonathan, I hope Larry can address too. On Cuba, you said that it was like during the special period really bad now. Is that just the fallout on tourism that's prominent in Cuba's economy of the pandemic, or is it something else that the U.S. is doing or something else? The second question for Jonathan, in going around the countries of Latin America, you skipped one of the larger, more important ones, Argentina. Was that on purpose, or is there anything about what's been going on in Argentina that you might want to say? I know that there have been stuff like workers' takeovers of factories and stuff like that, not super recently, but not all that long ago. Third, there was an interesting thing fairly recently coming out from Latin America Working Group, another group that works on, you know, solidarity with Latin America, talking about what's been the Biden administration's policy toward Latin America so far. And one of the things they said is it seems like
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
It seems like Biden's main issue in Latin America is cutting down migration from Central America, and that other things are issues they've been paying a lot less attention to. Fourth thing, and this is the one that both Larry and Jonathan, what is the role of China in Latin America, and how has the U.S. interacted with it? I know that it seemed lots of evidence of Chinese companies in the economy and visits to Latin America in recent past. And the last thing, and Larry talked about the various Biden administration advisors issues that were heavily dominated by CFR. It wasn't clear to me which roles in the Biden administration he's talking about.
Wrap up.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So this is a lot of questions. I'm hoping the panelists would 7 minutes, doesn't even sound like enough, but answer the ones you can and then maybe return to the ones you don't have time for, but we'll do 7-minute rounds for each of the panelists.
Okay, maybe I should start first because Bill's questions were addressed to me.
Okay.
I think in regard to the first question, the 5 people that have, of the 30 that I studied in the Biden team, the 5 people that seem to have, they're professionals, but they don't have any strong ties to the capitalist class, like Deb Hallinan, for example. Now, are they just to sell the program, or are they actually going to do something serious? And I think the reason why these 5 had closer ties to the working class, or less ties to the capitalist class, is because they're in positions that are less important to the capitalist class, less central. When you're talking about interior or education, these are less, there's other ones that I'm not thinking of right now, but they're less key. So yes, Deb Hallinan and the guy that's running the education one, that's less central to the capitalist class than foreign policy or economic policy, which are the ones that are closest to the capitalist class. So they can do some things that are real. The education guy seems to be a serious, and that legitimizes, a serious guy, and he's doing some good things in education. That legitimizes the program and legitimizes the Democratic Party and the capitalist way they're ruling things. So the capitalist class likes that. It's not just to sell the program. There's going to be some real things there. The domestic reform. These guys are oriented more towards domestic reform, and they're going to be doing some domestic reform. That's part of the Democratic Party program. That's how they legitimize themselves and keep so many workers in this country on board. Now, as far as foreign affairs goes, they have a variety. It's their magazine, but they also throw out lots of ideas for discussion within the CFR. It's a discussion place, and then they have discussions in the CFR meetings. So things may not be going well, and the ruling class is certainly worried about things not going well, but they're still dominant, and they still have the main power. That's how I would respond to that. They put a lot of different things in foreign. They even had, for example, foreign affairs argues and pretends mostly, but there's something real there too, that they're open to diverse opinions. They even had Leon Trotsky write an article in the 1930s just for discussion. Obviously, they're not Trotskyists, they're capitalists, but they wanted to hear what Trotsky had to say about some issues. So they published some other things in it just for discussion and to broaden the argument. So then Greg Jan asked me about the next presidential election. Will the CFR continue to support Democrats or consider Trump? I don't think they're going to consider Trump at all. From their point of view, Trump was a big problem, a disaster. They had some people in the Trump administration, but it's the least connected to the CFR of all the administrations since 1921. So they're not a Trump. They had some people that were saying, and in publishing in foreign affairs, that Trump was doing some good things. But in general, they certainly want the reform at home and imperialism abroad characteristic of the Democrats in the next presidential election. That would be my opinion. Then I think Jonathan can take over for most of Caldicec's questions. Jonathan? You hear me, Jonathan?
Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, your turn.
First, I'm going to answer Greg. Not a lot on Steven Zonzinger, sadly, in Ecuador. Keep in mind, all of the media in Ecuador, the major media, is controlled by the right. They're not interested in him. There's not even much about Julian Assange, who was illegally had his Ecuadorian citizenship stripped from him by President Lenin Moreno, who was an absolute traitor. Maybe I can get back to that in my closing remarks about Ecuador. Also, in regard to Dave's question on this special period in Cuba, I see three major causes. One is that Trump tightened sanctions. Two is the reduction in tourism due to the pandemic. And three is that they were getting, in the past, considerable assistance from Venezuela. And that assistance is either much less or non-existent at the moment because things are so bad in Venezuela. So those are the three causes of Cuba's problems right now. In regards to Argentina, Dave is right, I skipped it, and I shouldn't have. There was a progressive president that was elected in Argentina in their last presidential election, defeating a right-wing president who interrupted many years of progressive center-left presidencies. And they're back now in Argentina. An even more glaring admission from my presentation, horrible really, was Bolivia. In Bolivia, they were able to overturn a US-backed military coup in 1 year with a democratic election. To put this in context, it took, I think, Chile about 30 years to have any kind of democratic election after the coup there, and they still have not overcome that government. They still are operating under the Pinochet Constitution. So it's more than 50 years, and Bolivia did it in 1 year. Comrades, that was a tremendous achievement, and we should all be inspired by that. China's role in Latin America, it's quite significant and growing. I consider it to be imperialistic. It is not as bad as US imperialism. And the left doesn't talk about it in terms of imperialism here, you know, the great majority, and in general in Latin America. The left is excellent on US imperialism, Chinese imperialism, hardly at all. And there are big differences. US imperialism seeks to control the politics of the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. The Chinese are not interested in that. They're interested in doing business, and they're happy to give you loans at pretty good terms, and they have one string attached. They want you to hire Chinese companies to do the construction work. So that is the string that the Chinese attach to their aid. But USA comes with a lot of strings. They really want to shape the governments in Latin America and the Caribbean. Chinese, I don't think they're interested in that at all. I don't know if I answered all of Dave Kadlicek's questions. I hope I did.
Okay, I can add the, Dave asked about the Biden roles. Which ones were I talking about? I was talking about the top positions. Kamala Harris, for example, is not in the CFR, but her sister, who was the head of her campaign when she was running, is in the Council on Foreign Relations. And of course, Kamala Harris is connected to Harvard and DLA Piper, a big multinational law firm, through her husband, and through her brother-in-law, who's the chief counsel for Uber. She's connected into the whole thing about having workers undercut, no unions and so on. Blinken, the Secretary of State, he's been a CFR member forever. His dad is a CFR member. His brother's a CFR member. His wife's a CFR member. It's all there. Janet Yellen, she's been a CFR member for forever. Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, he's a CFR member. He's also with this West executive, and he got Raytheon when he left the military. He was working for Raytheon Defense, so-called defense contractor. Rouse, the Council of Economic Advisors, she's a CFR director, a director of the Council on Foreign Relations. And she was with Rowe Price, a big investment firm, before she went in there. Jake Sullivan, he's a CFR author. He wrote 5 articles for the CFR magazine, Foreign Affairs. And I maybe should have mentioned that a lot of articles in Foreign Affairs are the CFR view from CFR members and CFR connected people. Other ones are kind of think articles that aren't necessarily representative of CFR. Ron Klain, the Chief of Staff, his wife is in this Council on Foreign Relations. John Kerry, he's in the Council on Foreign Relations forever, and his wife's in the Council on Foreign Relations. His brother's in the Council on Foreign Relations. His daughter's in the Council on Foreign Relations, and his family's a billionaire family.
30
I could
seconds.
go on. The head of the
30 seconds.
CIA is in the CFR, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, it's in my article. If you want to get it, you can get it on Monthly Review on the internet. Okay.
All right, well, thank you to the panelists for the very efficient answering. We're going to go to Jean Rule, followed by Stan. And Norma, I can't tell whether you have a question or not, but you'll tell us when it's your turn. Go ahead, Jean.
Okay, well, thank you, comrades, so much for that discussion. I really appreciate it. I do have a somewhat different point of view, which I'd like you to address, because I've been most involved with the Chinese solidarity movement and what's going on in China, and been trying to follow that. And I just remind everybody that both Marx and Lenin talked about workers of the world unite. They didn't say American workers unite or English workers unite. It was workers of the world. And I think we need to understand that the largest component of the working class is Chinese, followed closely by Indian. Asian workers are the largest component of the working class. And they're also the best organized and most effective. There's 90 million members of the Communist Party of China. And they're well educated and knowledgeable, much more knowledgeable about Marxism than most American Marxists. Further, the largest trade union in the world is Chinese, the All China Federation of Labor, with 300 million members. And again, they're closely affiliated with the Communist Party of China, and they've been effective. The average wage of Chinese workers has quadrupled in the last 20 or 30 years, as well as the poorest paid sector of the Chinese working class has been, and the peasantry has doubled their income over the last 20 or 30 years. And these are statistics from from an unimpeachable source, the New York Times and the World Bank, which are not, pro-Chinese. So I think it's a serious misinterpretation to call them imperialists. And that's something there needs to be much more discussion about that. But I just wanted to say I have a much different view of this than our panelists do. And I look forward to their addressing this topic further. Thank you.
Okay, so Stan, you're next. I want to remind the audience has a 2-minute limit. Go ahead, Stan.
Hi, I've been timekeeping so somebody can timekeep me. Regarding what Jonathan mentioned about international solidarity, and a concrete example of it was yesterday at the Port of Oakland, where in 2 picket lines, the Zim's chartered ship was forced to leave, which was a victory. And some other examples. On May Day this year, all the labor councils of the Bay Area had a march in San Francisco. Unfortunately, the combined total was only about 2,000, 2,500. But still, one good thing that occurred in the march route, which went from the Embarcadero to San Francisco City Center, we stopped and had a brief rally at the Chilean consulate in the flood building, and in solidarity with the general strike in Chile. Didn't make any news here, but apparently it did in Chile, which is good. But I think I agree with Jonathan, we should think of more examples of direct action. And by direct action that affects them economically. Smashing a few windows in this or that institution really does very little, except for the window companies. So I just want to throw that out. Hopefully there'll be more direct examples of labor action. One thing I have a question for anybody is AFELD, the notorious CIA-backed front within the labor movement, the Trojan horse within the labor movement, are they still existing? Do they still exist? Are there any recent reports of their activity? Traditionally, for decades, they played a terrible role in undermining left-wing trade union movements in many countries. But are they still active? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm trying to time at the same time. So Norma, did you have a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, Jean, thank you for reminding us that there is a struggle for socialism, for communism in the world, and it seems strongly to be based in China, but many other places as well. The DSA was reading the Theo Rio Franco's Resource Radicals. Larry, maybe you have some, and Jonathan, maybe you have some ideas about that book if you've come across it. I saw it as a doctoral thesis, which is a good thing for her, but I didn't think it was handy for us to, except to remind us that the big problem is, how do we handle control of providing for us all? And of course, study of extraction doesn't lead us toward taking care of us, which is by one way to do reasonable farming, to change the idea of farming altogether. And I have some comments about that someday. And of course, to provide us all the rest of the things that go along with our material benefits is a concern of the socialist struggle. But the use of extraction needs to be, you need to make a comment about it. Thank you. Very good job of you, very good.
Okay, thanks, Norma. So we just had 3 questions. I hope we could do 5 minutes each for the panelists max, because we have a couple more questions and then it'll be time for the wrap up. Okay, so I don't know who wants to go first on that. We'll take
I could go first. And in response to Jean, this is a very complicated question, of course. Monthly Review had a series of magazine articles some years back that said that it pretty much concluded, as far as I can remember, that China is really a state capitalist country. It's not really a communist country. It's a state capitalist country. A real communist country is characterized by rule by the proletariat. Now, when you have as many billionaires, almost as many billionaires in China as there is in the United States, let that sink in for a second. There's almost as many billionaires in China as there are in the United States. That doesn't sound like a socialist country ruling by the proletariat to me. Sounds like they're exploiting workers so that these billionaires can get more billions. So it's a complicated issue. I know Gene has his point of view, and he had no doubt has a response to what I just said. Summary, you can only summarize this, quickly in a minute or half a minute or something, and it's a very complicated issue. The question of democracy and rule by the proletariat is key in my view, and starting to end things like wage labor, wage slavery, getting out of that. And then there's the whole question of the Uyghurs. There's an international trial now about that. And again, it's a very complex issue, but it looks like they put 1 million Uyghurs in a concentration camp and are re-educating them. That doesn't sound like a communist country to me. That's not my view of communism. So I'll let Jonathan say what he wants to say about that. And we can, like I say, it's a longer discussion, and Gene has his own view on this, and he no doubt doesn't agree with me. Okay, go ahead, Jonathan. You have something to say maybe too on this.
Look, I'm no expert on China. I can offer
I would
my
say that
view,
too.
but it's not an expert view. I can tell you in regard to Ecuador, China is interested in many of the same things that Western capitalists are interested in Ecuador, and this is resource extraction. They want Ecuadorian oil, they're getting it. They are the leading consumer of Ecuadorian shrimp. This is an industry that's very destructive of the coastline of Ecuador. They want minerals. And again, as I did mention in my presentation, they're glad to advance loans to develop this thing and reach an agreement with the government of Ecuador for Ecuador to get a decent share of the profits. But they want you to use Chinese companies to do the mining, to do the oil exploration, things like that, even though Ecuador has a state-owned oil company and a lot of experience. It's an original member of OPEC, although it dropped out a couple of years ago. In regards to, and this touches on what Norma has mentioned about resource extraction, this is a hallmark of imperialism. If wealthy countries, people in wealthy countries wanted to invest and build factories in Ecuador and other poor countries, they could do it and they would make a profit. And these factories would employ people in good jobs, relatively good jobs, permanently. They don't do that. China doesn't do that. Certainly the United States and Europe and Canada don't do it. By the way, Canada is one of the worst when it comes to mining in Latin America. This is an example. I would also point out that China is now backing, or at least tacitly so, the coup government in Myanmar. And they are backing this government, it appears to me, for their selfish economic reasons. They don't want to damage their economic relations with Myanmar. And they're going to back this dictatorship, this military dictatorship, which is exactly what the capitalist imperialist countries do. They back dictatorships as long as they do business with them. That's it.
Okay, thank you. So
Stan asked a question we didn't answer. Does AFIL still exist? I really don't know.
I'm not sure. I think it changed its name to the Solidarity Center. And
Yes.
I think they are engaged in the same work that AFELD was engaged with. They are working to strengthen non-socialist union leadership throughout the world.
Okay,
There was a good connection, a strong connection with the CFR on some of those people too. There were CFR members, some of these so-called labor leaders, quote unquote. Anyway, go ahead.
right. I think labor leaders and environmentalists can fall into both camps, unfortunately. So, Carol Pinson, did you have a question? Just tell me yes or no, so I can, also you're muted.
Yes.
Okay, so it'll be Carol and then Yusuf. So, and then those are the last two I see, unless one more pops up, and then we'll go to the wrap up probably. And you can answer the questions in the wrap up if that'll work. Go ahead, Carol.
Okay, I saw the documentary, The New Corporation, last night, and they said that corporations are now being treated as nation states. Oftentimes, it's becoming that way. It seems to be the case in the Donziger case. I don't know if he will actually, I think he thinks that he will be acquitted eventually, if Merrick Garland takes his case, but if he doesn't, then probably wouldn't be. But anyway, I just was wondering if you have noticed that kind of thing, either of you have noticed it, in your areas of expertise, or, the places that you are.
Okay, thanks. And Yusuf? You're muted.
Yeah, okay. Well, let me just put it on the record that I would disagree that one, well, first of all, that one should take at face value whatever one hears about China. And it's a whole different discussion, but out of principle, ours should be one of solidarity, nevertheless. Now, when it comes, my question though is about the so-called eco-socialist party in Ecuador, and I've heard a much more sinister evaluation of it, that it's actually somewhat of a deliberate plant, and that they have connections with imperialism. And let me say that I think it is a new tactic to divert the discourse from the economic concerns of the people to more safe issues that some cosmetic changes in the environment policy, some democratic rights, or this or that minority. These are some things that imperialism could actually absorb, but they cannot absorb those struggling against neoliberalism. So I would like some further comment if you somewhat agree on this
30
evaluation.
seconds, please.
Yeah, okay. I'm finished because it's not only this party in Ecuador, but we see it in other manifestations in other countries as well.
Okay, so this is last call for participants' questions. Not seeing any. We're going to do, we could do a little more time for the wrap up. We could do 8 minutes each for the wrap up if you need it, since you have questions to answer. And we will start with Jonathan.
Thank you, Marcia. I want to respond to Yusuf's question about this candidate who portrays himself as an eco-socialist, who was very instrumental, and this indigenous party that he ran on was very instrumental in this right-wing banker winning the election, which occurred on April 11th, the runoff election. And yes, we are going to see this elsewhere in the Americas. First, eco-socialism is a rising tendency, but it is not a well-understood tendency. And it is not a tendency with a strong track record or strong organizations that are identified with it at this point. So it can be used in many different ways. And it was largely used by this candidate, Yaku Perez, in Ecuador, to basically say that the left is worse than the right when it comes to resource extraction issues, and then when it comes to dealing with indigenous peoples and their issues. This is a very complicated situation in Ecuador. There is this indigenous party, but its politics are nebulous. It has a left wing, a center, and a right wing within it. Also, in regard to what Yusuf said, I have read that there are nefarious ties with this party and with this candidate, Yaku Perez, with institutions that come from the ruling class, including the Democrats and Republican international arms, and also NGOs that are not particularly left-wing. And he really tried to make this issue of resource extraction a central issue. And it is a central issue in all of these countries that are in Latin America and the Caribbean, because they are all affected by imperialism and they are all impacted by resource extraction. That's what the imperialists want to do. They're not interested in building factories that will give good jobs to people. They want the resources. And China is the same. This is the candidate, Yaku Perez. It is true that both the left-wing candidate, Andres Arauz, and the right-wing candidate who was elected president, Guillermo Lasso, are for increasing resource extraction in the United States, in Ecuador. But this idea is not like some idea they came up with that fell out of the sky. This is the only thing that the rich countries want to invest in. So you could have a plan to build all kinds of things in Ecuador: schools, hospitals, factories, roads, railways. They don't want to do that. That's not their interest. So it's not like the left and the right both came up with the same idea. Oh, we want to develop our resource extraction. No. This is what's available to them in terms of international investment. I also wanted to go back to something my good brother Larry Shoup said in regards to the Green Party's campaign for president, which I agree with him, that Howie Hawkins had a good position on imperialism and solidarity. However, to my knowledge, maybe Greg knows better than I, the Green Party is really not involved in international solidarity work at all on an organizational level. They do have relations with other Green parties, but this is not something that the Green Party has taken up. And I want to go back to something that Larry and I have advocated for many, many years. And this is impactful on the Green Party and Peace and Freedom Party, other left-wing third parties. We need a party of a new type. We need a party that is as dedicated to leading and being involved in social movements, including international solidarity, as they are in running candidates, participating in elections. And it's going to be very limited in the electoral arena, the way forward in terms of third parties, because let's be real, comrades, the Republicans are only going to put up fascist candidates for the foreseeable future. And the response of the electorate, including the left, is going to be the same as it was to Trump. The Green Party's share of the presidential vote in 2020 was down 80% from 2016. 80%. Think about that. There is not room for radical electoral parties to succeed at a major level, perhaps at local levels, but not at state or federal level, as long as the Republicans are a fascist party.
That's Jonathan's summary. Okay, let me make my sum up here. The Biden administration's weak climate policy and aggressive foreign policy will likely not end well. We need a very strong Green New Deal, and conflict with a rising China is likely sooner or later. China is patient, so the timing is uncertain about this coming conflict. So one of the questions before us is, what role can the left play to avoid the worst outcomes here in the United States and internationally? The plutocratic Biden administration must be subject to intense pressure from the rank and file to force them to do the right thing for the environment and to avoid a war that could end humanity. Quote from Frederick Douglass: "Power concedes nothing without a demand." Brother Frederick Douglass. And Margaret Mead once said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." So I'd advocate direct action. Direct action delivers the goods. So those of us who want to be courageous enough to do that direct action, that's the kind of thing we need to focus on. Jonathan and I disagree slightly on the efficacy of third parties. I think third parties raise issues that need to be raised. However, he has a good argument, a strong argument when it comes to the fascist Republicans and the need to, in many cases, unite behind Democrats to stop the fascists. Because if that happens, we're in deep trouble if the fascists get back in power. So that's a big dilemma for us. But I think that third parties are raising the issues that need to be raised, and direct action on all of our parts is very important for our collective future. Thank you for attending today. Marcia may have another comment.
Okay, well, actually, this is time for closing, but we also have time for announcements and
Marcia, can I just briefly respond to what Larry said?
yeah, because you have time.
I want to be clear. I am not against left-wing third parties. I'm talking about how they have to do things differently in the future. I am not against them. I'm not saying this is a waste of time. I agree with Larry. They bring up very important issues that the Democrats will never bring up. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I think I'll interject it since I since I get to talk being moderator. I think that our parties do actually, at least individuals in our parties actually take part in these solidarity movements and actions. And we advocate it among, we often try to even organize it among our members and constituents. I think our real problem is that we're so small. So I'll just leave it at that. I want to thank everyone for participating, and I just want to make this announcement so I don't forget to make it. The forums take place on the first Saturday of most months. We're taking a summer break and we'll reconvene on September 11th, 2021, which you'll notice is the second Saturday because we don't want to have a forum on Labor Day weekend. You can sign up on our list to get forum notifications, and I believe that the email address for that is in the chat. It was at the beginning, and perhaps it will go in again if someone puts it in there. And now I want to see if anyone wants to make an announcement, and then we'll have a song courtesy of Sudia. Are there any announcements? Jonathan, and then Jean, and then Stan.
Yes, I just wanted to announce that the DSA International Committee Americas Group is putting on a program, post-election program on Ecuador. And it will be on June 13th. And I am putting it in the chat right now, the Zoom link for that. Hopefully I'm getting it in there. Yes. So just wanted to let folks know we've got two excellent speakers who will be initiating the discussion, and then there'll be about an hour's worth of discussion. And this is really a discussion aimed at socialists to talk about how we should orient ourselves to doing solidarity work regarding Ecuador moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks.
So the link didn't show up in the chat, Jonathan.
Okay, while you're doing that, I'm going to call on Eugene Rule.
Okay, well, thank you, comrades. And again, I really appreciated the opportunity to have a multi-spectred discussion on this, and I appreciate that. But I want to invite everybody to Sunday morning at the Marxist Tribe Library, which is just a few blocks from the Starry Plow, and even shorter by Zoom. But it'll be on Zoom. But our topic tomorrow is going to be Israel-Palestine, a historical perspective from a Palestinian communist. And our speaker will be Wadi Halabi. He describes himself as a wandering Palestinian. He was born in Jaffa in 1946, and he and his family were forced out on May of 1948 and forced to Egypt, Lebanon, and most of his life he spent as a wandering Palestinian. But he ended up in the Boston area where he joined the US Communist Party US and has been deeply involved with the Chinese Communist Party. But it'll be a fascinating discussion, and you can get the information from our website, icssmarks.org, and I will put that into the chat. And thank you.
And I just wanted to mention, we were supposed to have a speaker from Iraq today on the Palestinian question and the US policy towards Israel-Palestine. I think that what happened was that because of the Block the Boat action, they just weren't able to make it today. Ditto, Roger Harris from Task Force on the Americas is on a delegation to Latin America. So I really want to thank Jonathan for stepping in at the last minute and doing such a great job. And now a song from Sudia.
Wait, I had an announcement.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot Stan. Sorry, Sudia. Go ahead, Stan.
Yeah, I don't have the particulars. Unfortunately, something wrong with my email, but I'll give my email address and I'll tell you why. slwwv is Victor A at gmail.com. Basically, the shorthand version is many activists of different ages are wanting to have more informal discussions at outdoor brewery pubs, by Lake Merritt, et cetera, about some of the new issues that have been raised in the last year and exactly how to respond to them, particularly about class, when it should or shouldn't be emphasized versus race and nationality and so on and so forth. A lot of different issues are all swirling around there, and there's many new activists. So if you'd be interested in such a serious discussions, but informal, like over beer or wine or soda or whatever, get in touch with me. slwwva at gmail.com. A lot of the people involved, especially the younger activists, will be with DSA, but many won't be. Thank you.
Stan, put your email address in the chat if you want people to have it.
I will, right now.
Okay, and take it away, Sudia.
I have to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm unmuted. There's a few songs swirling around in my head related to what has been talked about today. One is a song for world peace. Another, I think I sang last time, was about the workers taking over the banks. The other is a climate song, and the other is The People United Will Never Be Defeated, which came out of the struggle in Chile against Pinochet, and it's in Spanish. So I can do one or two, and I can start with one or the other. Anybody have a thought? What do you think, Larry?
The first one you mentioned.
The climate song?
Yeah.
Or the world peace? Okay.
World peace.
And I must say that a lot of what I sing is inspired by Pete Seeger, the tradition of Pete Seeger. And this is one he sang a lot. Last night I had the strangest dream I never dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. I dreamed I saw a mighty room. The room was filled with men, and the people and the papers they were signing said they'd never fight again. And when the papers were all signed and 1,000,000 copies made, they all joined hands and bowed their heads, and grateful prayer was said. And the people in the streets below were dancing round and round, and guns and drums and uniforms were scattered on the ground. Last night I had the strangest dream, never dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. Do you want another one? Do you want one in Spanish? Or climate? Or do you want the climate song?
Either one. I like them.
Let's start with the climate. So this is one that became known worldwide, that started in the Plaza in Brussels, I believe. And if you look online for Singing for the Climate, you'll find it happening in many different places, including classrooms in the United States with school children. We need to wake up. We need to rise up. We need to open our eyes and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now. We're on a planet that has a problem. We need to solve it, get involved and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now. Make it cleaner, make it greener, make it fast, make it last, and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now. No point in waiting, nor hesitating. We must get wise, take no more lies, and do it now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now. And if that sounds familiar to you, it's the old Italian revolutionary song, Bella Ciao. Okay, last one. I'll do it, the Chileno in Spanish. De pie, cantad, que vamos triunfar, avanzan ya, bandera de unidad, y tú vendrás marchando junto a mí, y así verás tu canto, tu bandera florecer, la luz del rojo amanecer, anunciará la vida que vendrá. De pie y cantar, el pueblo va a triunfar, será mejor la vida que vendrá, a conquistar nuestra felicidad. Y en un clamor, 1000 voces de combate alzarán, dirán canción de libertad. Con decisión, la patria vencerá. Y ahora el pueblo que se alce en la lucha con voz de gigante, gritando adelante, fists in the air. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. Pie cantar, el pueblo va a triunfar, será mejor la vida que vendrá a conquistar nuestra felicidad en un clamor. 1000 voces de combate alzarán, dirán canción de libertad. Con decisión la patria vencerá. Y ahora el pueblo que se hace en la lucha con voz de gigante, gritando adelante. Anyway, that was El Pueblo Unido, jamás será vencido. It's interesting because I have a project for the last 12 years in the state of Oaxaca in Mexico, working with indigenous educators, and we sing a lot of songs. And when we sing that song, I'm really shocked. They all know it, every word, and they all immediately have their fists in the air. So it is definitely a song that has spread all through struggles in Latin America. Do you agree with that, Jonathan? You're muted.
Absolutely, absolutely. The Chilean struggle is very inspiring to this day.
Yeah, yeah. Great. Thank you, Jonathan and Larry. You all did a great job.
Yeah, thanks to everyone for coming. And while you're still here, I want to just remind you, it's in the chat, info@sudsnackssocialism.org is our new list for announcements. It's going to be an announce-only list.
What part is the Suds?
Well, what happened was we used to meet at the Starry Plow, which we if they open, we're going to do again.
Yeah.
If they let us.
When they open up.
Marcia, that address is for folks who want to be added to the list. That's not the address of the list.
Oh, okay. So
People
that,
should send their name and address to that address if they want to be put on the announcement list.
there you go. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
I knew what snacks and the other thing, but Suds, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I know people don't, and it looks like David Campbell just put it somewhere. Okay, well, thanks everybody.
A quick